Share screening. Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So, hi all. Today we have the honor of introducing Penny Endersby. She's with us today. Penny spent much of her career as a researcher in armor and explosives. She served at the Royal Armament and Research Development Establishment, becoming the UK expert on electric and intelligent armors. She was then appointed as a manager at the Defence of Science and Technology Laboratory in 2009. And in 2015, she became the Cyber and Information System Division's head at the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory. And whereas this already leaves us amazed with the feeling of being in front of a James Bond character in real life, Penny continued to build an eclectic research experience. In December 2018, she was appointed chief executive at the Met Office. She's the first woman to fill that role, where she has been advocate of climate change. She also sits on the IOP Council since 2017. She serves on the board of Ploughshare Innovations, that is a technology transfer office of the Ministry of Defense. Also, she promotes diversity in engineering and science as a visiting professor at the University of Southampton, where she assists students and researchers in developing their innovative ideas to commercialize them. I remind you all that you can find in the chat a link to VBox for your questions, and thanks, Penny, for being here with us today.
Thank you very much. Can I check you can hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. I just wanted to do that before I started talking. So great pleasure to be with you all today. And I know you've had one talk from a government scientist with my good colleague Carol Mundell yesterday, but I know much of this talk will be about more academic careers. So this is really a chance to talk about the opportunities that being a scientist and specifically a physicist in government can give you. And that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years of my life now. So I'll have the next slide, please. And I'm going to talk you through the career that I've had in the context of the science I was doing, what it was that government was doing that made it need to pay for that science, and the things I've learned along the way. So I'll have the next slide and we'll go back to the very start of my career. And I really wanted to stress to you, because of the economic situation you're going to find yourself in, that when I graduated in 1991 in the depths of a recession. I'd been sponsored through my university by British Gas. I was at Cambridge. They'd arrogantly told us that we shouldn't apply to too many things because we'd get too many second interviews and we wouldn't have time to combine them with our finals. In fact, all the graduate schemes were closing down, and the job with British Gas as a researcher was the only job I could get. Wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do, and neither was my next job in defence. And I just wanted to share that to say, take the opportunities that present. Don't panic if you end up with your second, third or fourth choice. The opportunities will come for the right people. So my very first full-time job was working with British Gas. Really sharp-eyed people may note that that's not a government organisation, but it was when I joined them. It was privatised while I was there. And I was working in quite a fundamental field of research on solid oxide fuel cells, which are a high-temperature version of fuel cells. And we used to joke then they were the technology that was always 5 years away. I think fuel cells have made it into the mainstream now, but solid oxide are still quite a niche part of that. But they were ahead of their time in that they were looking for cleaner, more energy efficient ways to convert fossil fuels into energy rather than just burning them, which was less efficient. And I did that for about 18 months. And then actually the laboratory that I was working in relocated, and I was married and living in London. So one of us had to find another job, and my husband teaches. So those jobs only come up sometimes of year. And I was the first, and I simply answered an ad in the Telegraph for a job in defence. So I'll have the next slide, please. So I joined what was indeed the Royal Armaments Research and Development Establishment in 1993. And the sort of context that was going on at the time was that I joined the Armour Group. Armoured vehicles had been set up for the Cold War. They were designed to roll across the Polish plains front onto a Russian army, very heavily protected in the front and to fight hull down, not really suited to urban warfare or all-round protection or to be attacked from the sides. And that context has never been true since and was already outdated then. And we were moving much more to things like peacekeeping missions where you've got no camouflage and you're in streets where people can shoot at you from windows and rooftops. And the other big thing that was driving protection at the time was the IRA terrorist threat. And when I started work, we were still being told to check our cars every morning and vary our routes and times to work. And so the other thing that's in that picture is a very, very early automated vehicle, because bomb disposal is one of the first things you want to do without a human present if you possibly can. So that's the context I joined in, trying to make armoured fighting vehicles as much lighter as we could while giving them better protection all round. And I did that work for some 10 years. I'll have the next slide, please. And I really did become a national, and it doesn't take much to be a world expert in light armours because there aren't too many competitions. And I was working on armours that were either electrically powered or able to react in some kind of early intelligent way and respond differentially to a threat. And by the end of that 10 years, I really was a very expert researcher. I'm very glad for the grounding it gave me. It's worth saying I don't have a PhD. I went straight in as a graduate, but I think I did much of the same skill building in terms of how you design a research program, how you write it up and so on, that you would do if you did a master's and a PhD route. And it culminated with a request for me to do a study into how light armoured vehicles could really be. So if I looked at how good the threats were going to be, how much metal a weapon could get through, how powerful an engine could be for a certain weight, how heavy the chassis, how efficient the armour. And I did a study that sort of worked out that a fully protected vehicle was always going to need to be at least 30 tonnes, and a light one perhaps 15. And at the time, that was not a fashionable answer. And then I had my first baby and I went on maternity leave. And while I was on maternity leave, I heard the Master General of the Ordnance come on the radio and say we were going to have this wonderful new vehicle called FRES, Future Rapid Effects Concept, and it was going to be as lethal and survivable as a 60-ton Challenger 2 tank, but helicopter portable. And I said something unprincipled and unmentionable to the baby in my lap. But FRES was designed as a whole concept family of vehicles. I can't show you one because it never came to fruition. And its slogan was "Go first, go fast, go home." And I'm afraid that the troops called it "Go first, go fast, die early." And eventually, so almost 20 years after I did that study, Ajax was delivered in 2017, weighing about what I said it would say in the study. And I think that's kind of a point of the fact that sometimes if the best research isn't aligned to the groupthink of the day, it doesn't quite land. And it remains a regret to me we spent so much time on that. I will have the next slide, please. In the meantime, I was working on how you do make armours lighter, and I was working on electrically powered armours. And again, perhaps a concept a bit ahead of their time. On the left there is a picture of a warrior fitted out with an experimental electric armour fit. And we got it working, and it was much lighter than any other technology that was available. But we really struggled with the safety of operating that. That vehicle could be charged up to 30,000 volts. And obviously fighting environments, a very messy, dirty, unpredictable, hostile environment. And making it safe to operate with a person in it was something that we didn't crack while I was working on the work. So it was some really fascinating physics about the magnetohydrodynamics of huge electrical forces on fast-moving conductors and those sorts of things, but not quite a realization. And I think now with that move towards autonomous vehicles, this is something that will come back into its own. And I know we're still working on it. And all through that time, when I joined both British Gas and the defence organisations that eventually morphed into the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory, I was really passionately committed to doing my science as a government scientist, and I didn't want to get involved in management at all. So it just shows how wrong you can be if you look forward a few years in your career. But this job was my first job as a team leader, and it's where I learned the fun of actually having a team who can achieve more than you can on your own, and how to delegate and how to develop people. And I really took a change of career and began to reinvent myself as a leader of scientists rather than as a core scientist myself. So I'll have the next slide. And I was very fortunate with the opportunities that DSTL gave me. And the next job I did was to run assorted groups in our physics department, so talking perhaps 50 to 80 people. I worked in acoustics, a lot of it underwater, looking at how you could hear other people's submarines before they heard ours, but also locate sniper fire, those sorts of things. And I worked in hazard assessment, which was something that's come back to be useful at the Met Office, because we were looking at how clouds of toxic materials disperse under different meteorological conditions and how you model those kinds of flows. Very much the same technology that we use for modeling weather here. And that sort of gave me some insights into how you manage people who know much more than you. So when I had the electric armour team, I knew as much about the topics they were working on as any of them. Here I was managing experts for the first time who were far more knowledgeable than me. And by the time you get to the sort of job I do today, where you've got thousands of people, inevitably 1,999 of them will be more knowledgeable than you about your expert subject. So that's a skill you have to develop. And I will move on. And I moved on to head the physics department at DSTL. Next slide, please. There's a couple of things in this picture. On the left is Porton Man. So one of the things we covered was the sort of physical protection against chemical and biological threats. And Porton Man there is covered with places that you can plug in sensors, and he runs on that stand, and you can dress him up in protective clothing, and you can put him in a challenging toxic environment and measure what gets through the clothing and the seams and the zips as he moves. And over time, we began able to do that actually in real time, so we could really see the impact of different gates and things on stressing clothing different ways. And the other picture I put in, if I look nervous, it's because I'm just about to abseil off the top of that building. And I put it in because of that business about being a role model as you step up to big leadership roles and being prepared to put yourself out there. So by this time, I was managing a couple of hundred people. And I was beginning to get involved with the sort of taking on the corporate direction of DSTL. I was having to learn about governance because you can't watch what 200 people are doing. And at this time as well, I became a trustee of the Institute of Physics. So that was where some of my sort of third sector first board experience came to. So I'll move on to the next slide. And actually, there's a gap in jobs between here where I stepped briefly because there was an emergency into running our safety and estates function. And then I had the opportunity to go back to my old job, but the information management department became vacant. And it was really a complete change of direction for me. It was the area of sort of human and computer science. And just at the same time, I was offered a Royal Academy of Engineering visiting professorship, and they put me in Southampton. And instead of putting me in the physics department where I would feel comfortable because of my job, they put me in the computer science department. And at the time, I really felt very exposed and a great deal of imposter syndrome. And it probably took me several years to see what was the best contribution I could make as part of that, because it definitely wasn't to undergraduate teaching in computer science. But I could see, I took this job because I could see it was the big new area that was going to be affecting defence and indeed humanity. And as part of that, I also began really to step up our gender diversity aspects, because computer science is even worse than physics for representation still. And the picture on the right, it's not me, it's one of our female scientists inside a huge transformer. I think it's at Fawley Power Station, where we were beginning to do work on the cyber defence of critical national infrastructure. And indeed, as I foretold, next slide please, it did scale up in terms of importance to the Ministry of Defence, and really that information revolution was getting on. And I've put some words in my notes here. I've been faithfully reading, but I can say a bit more now. In the picture there, you've got one of our aircraft carriers when she was in build, with a couple of my scientists in front of it, looking at how you built in the cyber protection. We were interested in very much in the sort of data science and analytics for open source intelligence, for how you protected against an identified disinformation, That satellite imagery feature detection was a crowdsourcing competition we did for seeing if we could develop better techniques by the world's brain than we could with our scientists in-house. But at the same time, and I put this quote from SDSR so I didn't get it wrong, this was 2015, I was allowed to say, we will provide the armed forces with advanced offensive cyber capabilities, drawing on the National Offensive Cyber Programme, which is run in partnership between the MOD and GCHQ. And I put it so I couldn't say more than I was meant to, but I think what I can say now is we were developing from scratch the capability to be the MOD part of the cyber force that was announced in the last, the integrated review that's just being announced. And that was a capability that we really didn't have at all in the UK when we started, but we absolutely had by the time I left. So by this time I was a director of DSTL, and for a while I also acted as their chief technical officer, and I was really expecting to go on and take that job full time, but then another opportunity came up that just looked like it had my name on it. So I'll have the next slide. And I had been wondering what I would do next and whether I would stay in government or perhaps move away from the science and become more of a generic senior civil servant, or whether I could take another role. There was really only one role left above me in DSTL. And then the Met Office Chief Executive was advertised. And it looked like they really wanted a bit of a unicorn, because they were adamant that they wanted somebody who could manage a big business and lead large-scale organisational change, but also be a credible representative of our science and our scientific programmes. And this is one of those occasions as well where being female is a positive advantage. I knew that at the very least they would want a balanced shortlist, and there wouldn't be too many women out there competing with me for this. So from the moment I saw it, I thought, gosh, I really think I have a reasonable chance of this. And I'll be a bit knocked if I'm not shortlisted. And I gave it everything to get the job, and it's been a fantastic decision. It required me to move for a second time. I actually relocated my family from Kent to Wiltshire once when DSTL was moving, and I moved again with my grown-up children and my faithful husband, who's twice disrupted his career now to follow mine, to take on being CEO of the Met Office. And I want to talk a little bit more about what we do at the Met Office, because inevitably you'll think we do weather forecasts, and we do so much more. So next slide, please. I'm just waiting for the slide to come up. First thing to say is it's not just weather. We operate at all time scales. Next slide, please, Diana. I'm still looking at CE Met Office, but I'm looking for one that's with a pie chart on it. It's not just weather. We do climate as well. So we go all the way from nowcasting and what's going to happen in the next few minutes through to what will happen in hundreds of years. We operate through the whole value chain, from the most fundamental science all the way through to developing and delivering services. Thank you very much. That's what I've been waiting for. That are things. So the picture there on the services is one of our grids of our weather warnings. So we have people out on defence bases, in airports, all around the world, in transport hubs, as well as in our operations suite. Well, they would have been in the building I'm in today in our operations suite, but now they're dispersed because of COVID. But we've continued to deliver those services throughout. We're largely a government organisation. About 90% of our work is government funded, but it's very cross-cutting. We're a part of BEIS, but we do as much work for DEFRA, for transport, for defence. We are a trading fund, so we also do commercial work, everything from providing aviation forecasts to forecasts for sporting events. We operate all the way through from the civilian space to the military. We have quite a significant military mission. Oh, I lost slides altogether. I'm going to go on talking. And we're not just a national organisation. We have people located overseas, both for defence and other purposes, but we also play a big part in the international weather community. Nobody can make a weather forecast without global observations. And we also do a surprising amount of capacity development and overseas development under the auspices of the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, as well as some BEIS programmes. I'm going to move on, if we can have the slides. The next one has some of the BEIS priorities and what we do about them on it. But just to say that obviously it's very important to us as a government organisation that we are meeting what government priorities are. Those at the moment are fighting coronavirus And as well as providing forecasts for things like combinations of snow and vaccine hubs, actually, we've been doing a lot on providing large supercompute for epidemiological modelling, sharing climate data, looking at the impacts on air quality of everything being shut down. Backing business is the next priority with the sort of levelling up agenda. And again, as a West Country organisation, first of all. Thank you. Next slide, Diana. And as an organisation that does a lot in partnerships with academia and industry, we have a role to play there. Under the Unleashing Innovation, we have 5 universities that are Met Office partners, and we've also just set up a joint centre on environmental intelligence with Exeter University, which we intend to expand to numerous other partners as well, to look at the real cutting edge of how you apply artificial intelligence to environmental science. And obviously climate change is one of the government's largest concerns, and absolutely their biggest foreign policy concern. We're building up to hosting the Conference of the Parties, the next big climate change conference in Glasgow in November, and we'll have a large role to play there. And Met Office scientists from the Hadley Centre, in any case, run a huge part of the IPCC's modelling and write some of the chapters that will be in the report that goes to COP26. And increasingly now we're getting involved in climate consultancy to advise businesses on what they need to do to prepare for a net zero world. Next slide very quickly, because I want to leave you time for questions. A little bit about science and technology that goes on in the Met Office. The first thing is an absolutely vast supercomputer. The one we have at the moment does 15,000 trillion calculations per second. It's actually on its last legs, although it's still one of the largest that any weather and climate organisation has. And we're just on the point of signing the contract for our next one. So watch the press for exciting announcements coming up very soon. And with that, we need to be absolute ninjas at data wrangling. So we ingest 2 billion data points a day. We handle absolutely exascale data. That enables us to do things like modelling whole Earth systems, so not just the weather, the atmosphere, the cryosphere, the oceans, land use, the biosphere are all part of now our weather and climate models. The deal about does human released carbon cause climate change is really sealed. That's very well understood. Our main scientific focuses now are around what the right paths should be to net zero, what will happen as instead of the climate reacting to what humans do, humans react to what the climate will do, and what pathway should we take to reduce our carbon, and what implications will it have on all those complicated interlinked systems. And increasingly, artificial intelligence and machine learning is applied throughout our value chain, not so much as a forecasting tool, but in everything else from picking up a bad observation out of a mass of them to integrating with our users' data, so we can say not just where it's going to rain, but where a rain might cause a landslip on a railway line, or cause a thunderstorm cause a plane to be grounded, or upset a retail supply chain. So I'm going to come to my last slide, which is just coming back to what physics has brought me. And the first thing I would say is it opened up a world of opportunities, and certainly the career path I've taken is not one I could have begun to have forecast in neither technically nor in scale or anything else when I left university and went into my first job. But throughout that time, it's given me a framework for understanding all the many different technical areas I've been involved in. That fundamental understanding of the physical universe is something that's always with me. As a leader and a representative, but really from the start, even as a research scientist, that ability to communicate my work with conviction and accuracy. And I put a lot of effort these days into making sure when I'm representing the Met Office's great science, that I have got a handle on the detail of it, so that I don't let our scientists down by saying something incorrect, that where they're really expert and I make a slip. And that's part of what gives me and the organisation the credibility we have. So I think that's my time. I think there's just a slide to invite your questions, which I believe I may be able to see in the chat, but I'll hand back to Deanna so she can tell me how it's going to work. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Penny. So I guess we can share now the questions in VBooks.
Thank you very much. I was hoping I wouldn't have to find the link myself.
No, yeah. Okay, so first, did you ever face any ethical concerns when deciding to go into the defense sector?
So I wouldn't say going into the sector. I think when I went into the sector and as an armour scientist, I was more nervous about the experience of being an explosive scientist. And that was something that actually I found was very stimulating. And I was actually sort of letting off bombs myself and things when I started. And there's a fair amount of training required to do that safely. Generally, I took the view that unless you're a pacifist and you think that there's no point having an army at all, and if you're just nice to everybody, they'll be nice to you, which I'm afraid is something I don't believe. There is no advantage in having a bad armed forces or wasting money on one that's less effective than it can be. The only time I remember having any ethical concerns was actually around Gulf War II, and whether there was really a threat from weapons of mass destruction. Otherwise, mostly I've been happy that when we went into things, I was doing work that protected our troops and enabled them to operate. And of course, we were doing a huge amount of counter-terrorism work throughout that time as well. And that's something I feel is entirely ethically good and requires the same skill sets. An average day in my current role looks very different from what it looked like a year ago. So my role involved a huge amount of traveling and being out and about with people, both our own staff dispersed, my stakeholders, a lot of international contacts. And I've gone from waking up in the morning not knowing what country I was in to not leaving Devon for 6 months at a time. However, it still maintains that real balance of the internal focus, some of it on the sort of financial and governance aspects, some of it on the exciting science and what we do, the external focus, making sure that we're meeting our users' needs, and the Met Office exists to help you make better decisions to stay safe and thrive, and that international reach. And in fact, today's quite an intense day. I started the morning with a meeting with the chair of the Public Weather Service customer group, who represents all our government customers in one group because they all chip in money to a research and support fund. Now I'm with you. Then I've got a meeting with the Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization. I'll try to dip into the gather space between those two things. And then I've got a budget wrangle because we're waiting for a spending review outcome, which we expect to be COVID affected and have less money than we wanted, and we've got to work out where we're not going to spend the money we don't have. So that's today, and I guess that's fairly typical.
Busy days.
So I'll take these two together actually, and woman in leadership and female CEO. The sexism I faced in the workplace was much more early career. And there's nothing like being a CEO to insulate you against it. And I think actually it can give you a false sense of security that everybody's polite to you and respectful, so everything's fine, which isn't necessarily the case. The defence sector was more male dominated than weather. Weather and climate are actually quite good. The Met Office is about 37% female, and increasingly we do still have a leaky pipeline, but increasingly we have that representation at senior levels. When I started in defence, it was much, much less. I can remember, for example, coming back to work after the birth of my first child and somebody saying repeatedly, "Isn't that baby missing her mother?" So I certainly did encounter sexism. I used to build armoured targets, and there would be page 3 girls on the wall, and I would draw bikinis on them before I started. I'm happy to say I think at least those times have gone. Every government organisation's made a huge effort to improve its equality and diversity, and there's a big civil service drive for it. So I think what people face now are more insidious around being talked over or their ideas not being recognised, I would hope, rather than those kind of direct things. And I think I was very resilient to it because I'm a resilient person, but I increasingly realised that the people who were not resilient to it aren't in the field anymore. And so it was setting an extra barrier. As well as being competent and good at your job, you also had to be tough and able to shrug off teasing. And not everybody is, and that shouldn't be a filter for talent. It was then. I would like to think it is less now. equally, there have undoubtedly been advantages. So I've always been in rooms full of men in grey suits where I don't remember their names, but they all remember me, with organisations now always trying to look for balanced panels, balanced governance groups, and so on. People are normally ready to take my arm off for a credible senior female scientist or engineer, and I regard myself as both. And so I think it actually it's opened up more opportunities than it's blocked, but it hasn't been occasionally without pain. On the PhD or the master's, I really don't think it matters. Everybody assumes I have a doctorate since I've been a professor, but I don't. And indeed, I only have the Cambridge Masters they give away free with not going to prison for a few years after you complete your degree as well. So I did that work as a researcher in government, but all the organisations I know in government recruit at graduate and postdoc level. So I think it depends how much you know what you want to do. And the only reason I didn't do a PhD one was offered me was because my husband said there'll be no teaching jobs in Cambridge, which I'm not sure I think was a very good reason, but actually it was quite a good decision. So how can you apply for research projects for undergraduate students? Well, there are certainly summer placements. We take interns, and DSDL did, Met Office does, at all levels. We take them for gap years, we take them for summer, we sponsor students, and many of those we then go on to employ as well.
Sorry, how can you get to see this when the DSTL is posting a job or summer position for a student?
I would start with civil service jobs. What I will try to do, Deanna, is send you the links to ours as well. But most of those opportunities on there, and obviously also check the websites. They're all on there for both those organisations. Maybe also the Twitter accounts or something. Yes, we tweet, LinkedIn, all of those. So we're well represented across. LinkedIn might be the place to start, actually. Okay. Imposter syndrome. Do you know everybody has imposter syndrome, unless they're a complete megalomaniac. And men have it as well as women. They're just less willing, I think, sometimes to talk about it. But when you get to know male leaders well, they all say that. Every time I take a new job, I feel I'll get found out any minute. I've learned to recognise that there's a honeymoon period where nobody expects you to know anything. There's a period where you feel you should know things and you haven't caught up yet. And then you get into your stride and you think, actually, I'm unlikely to be asked anything that I really don't know anything about. I am on top of this now. And I think the very worst was being made a professor of computer science when I'm a physicist and an engineer, but not a computer scientist. That was probably the moment when I felt least equipped. I was least equipped to live up to the role. It was pretty daunting walking up to the front door of the Met Office for the first time as the CE as well. But I put it to one side and get on with the day. And I'm never afraid to say when I don't know something. I would much rather go, I didn't get it, explain it to me again, I've forgotten that acronym, I didn't understand. With weather and climate, it's please tell me what the axes on those charts are, because they're quite specialist, and the people you've been dealing with them all their lives, and by the time I've figured out the axes, the PowerPoint's often moved on, and it just takes a little longer to get my head around it. But I think that you're always better fessing up when you don't know and getting someone to explain it to you than trying to wing it. On the science, Met Office employs a huge range of scientific degrees, and actually almost any numeric degree. We take geographers, we take environmental scientists, we take computer scientists, we take data scientists, we take people with meteorology degrees, we take all sorts of physicists and mathematicians. If anything, I would say do learn to code, take the effort, and that's a regret I have. It was a niche skill when I was at university, and I never quite got to grips with it afterwards, and I think that would have opened up more opportunities to me. In terms of the next one, if you were offered more career opportunities after you graduated, I don't think I could ever have asked for a more exciting career than the one I've had. The only other thing I might have done would have been to do something completely different and do languages and law. And I was a sort of a real all-rounder at school. I could easily have gone a different route and not done science. And I think that being a barrister is another one that would have suited me. But if I'd been able to choose, if I hadn't come out in a recession, I was really interested. Like your previous speaker, actually, I specialised in my final year of natural sciences in materials science and metallurgy. I was particularly interested in ceramics, which were then a new hot thing. And perhaps that's a sign, like the cyber, that I like the emerging opportunities more than any particular technology in its own right. And I wanted to go and work with one of the big high-tech ceramics companies, and those were the ones I made my unsuccessful applications to. So I was thinking a much more sort of core research route and less applied than what I actually have done. Yes, I did feel intimidated by the prospect of taking on my first management role. I was managing mostly blokes, mostly older than I was, who'd been doing the job for longer. And I sort of expected I might tell them what to do and they might laugh at me. So I remember, and I suppose what I did was prepare very carefully early on. And again, that's part of that sequence of taking on new jobs, that I tend to find I need to work long hours in those first few months just to feel on top of it. But actually working huge hours doesn't suit me, and it's not something I do. And generally I work sensible hours, and as soon as I can and I'm on top of it, I go back to working a more reasonable week again. But the main thing I would say is try it, and don't assume somebody else out there is waiting who is better than you. And build the skills, and it's something you can learn and something you can train for, and something government is really, really good at doing is actually providing the training for anything you might want to do, whether you want to go into technical project management or program management, whether you want to take up a new area of science, whether you want to get into leadership. Government is really committed to making sure that you have the skills to do that well. And I've been given a huge investment of government time and money at every stage, both for sort of routine, next level skills, but also on some talent schemes, and all the way through to the government senior leader scheme, which is for aspiring directors in the civil service, which I did just before I took the Met Office job. And there are still more I can apply to. So that investment in talent from bottom to top is something government takes very seriously. What made me want to study physics? What can I say? I'm the daughter of an engineer and a linguist, so both those things were in my home. I was lucky to go to a very good girls' school that pushed the sciences, and it was something I could see I was good at. Where I was unusual is that nearly all the girls in my school wanted to do medicine, and I think my sixth form class was 28 medics, an electronic engineer, an aeronautical engineer, and me. And I knew that medicine wasn't for me. I was more interested in the underlying science. And I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. Natural sciences suited me, and in fact I thought I wanted to do theoretical chemistry, and the fact that I went up to do a broad degree that cut across made it easier for me to change my mind part way. And also I think possibly I would have gone into engineering if I'd understood it better. I think my instincts are more on the applied science side, but my school was really clueless about engineering. They thought it was for people who mended washing machines and lay under trains. So it wasn't something that was pushed. Some I've missed here. Shall I do maternity leave, or shall I do army and scientists?
Well, both are equally voted. So
I think the answer to does the army source scientists is probably not. The defence research organisations source scientists. The army does have scholarships for officers. and they quite like those to come with technical degrees, and they might well then go into technical specialisms like communications, but they tend not to employ them to do science. The army employs people to fight, so you would need to want to be a serving soldier to do that. Otherwise, defence research, both in government and out of government, is the way to go. Maternity leave, so I should say, I wish I had better news for you. I have a very selfless, generous husband who stopped work to look after our children for 7 years when they were young. I only took the statutory maternity leave, which was a lot shorter then than it is now. So I had 15 weeks with the first baby and 18 with the second. Therefore, it didn't have much impact on my career. My husband, who was a young head of department when the first child was born, went back in as a part-time classroom teacher, worked his way up to head of sixth, gave it up again to move with me again this time, and has gone back in as a part-time classroom teacher. And he has taken all the career penalties that are normally taken by women. And I would love to say that we're the couple that's cracked it. He was at Cambridge with me. He's just as clever and just as talented. But I'd love to say we were the couple that had cracked having it all. We really haven't. We were determined we wanted to look after our children ourselves and not outsource it. And I'm afraid I'm the person who goes home and goes, "What's for supper?" So that is the brutally honest answer. And be careful who you marry.
Yeah, yeah, that's great to have that goal of backup.
One of my high-flying colleagues in government said to me, someone said to me, one of you has to be a rock so the other one can be a rocket. And the other thing I would say is when we did that role swap, we had no idea we were baking it in. So he was working double my hours for 80% of my money as a teacher. And we thought, well, why would I stop and he go on? And we hadn't appreciated that by the time he went back in, he would, by then I'd been promoted a couple of times, and he wouldn't go back into the same level of job. So by then, whenever there was a choice to be made, it was always obvious that we couldn't afford for me to be the one to stop. And we didn't understand that was the choice we were making when we made it. And it's worked very well for us. Why was I glad I didn't do a PhD? I don't know if I was glad or not. I just don't think it cost me anything. I think that I ended up, I went in on the level of a graduate scientist. By the time I would have had my PhD, I was on the level of a postdoc scientist. It never held me back, and I got my research experience anyway. But I think if I'd done a PhD, that would have been equally fine. I think the civil service is an absolute role model employer for all aspects of diversity. It's something they really, really work on. So not just gender, but gender identity and LGBTQ, ethnicity, social diversity, and increasingly now diversity of thinking styles as well. It's something that the top of the civil service takes really seriously. Every senior civil servant is obliged to have diversity objectives. Every organisation is measured on it. And so some industry organisations are exemplary and others are not. It depends a lot on the leadership, but it's driven through the civil service.
Thanks. So what would you recommend to get a job within the government science? And also, you mentioned before already that it's important to learn to code. Is there any language that is preferable? What will give you better options out there?
I almost don't think it matters, actually, and the languages move on over a career anyway. But, we started off in Fortran, then it was C, then it was Java. Our software engineers here are on some very specific systems, Python. I don't think it matters. So I would take the opportunities you need to do your own research. Getting a job within government science, the opportunities are all out there on civil service jobs. If you've got connections on LinkedIn or into any of those organisations that you can talk to, do go and tap them up. And before you apply to any particular department, make sure you've read that department's objectives and main programs are, and be able to speak not just about the science you would do, but try to do what I've done today, link the science you're doing to what the organisation is trying to achieve, and be prepared to say why you want to work in government. Lots of people who do work in government, it's not the best paid compared with industry. So most people come here because they want to do a public good, and that's absolutely what motivates Met Office scientists. They want to save lives, they want to save the planet. They come to work because they think that their job makes a difference every day. And many of them would earn more doing data wrangling for a bank, but they would be bored and they wouldn't feel it was so valuable.
Thanks. So
have we come to the end? How are we doing for time? We've got a few more minutes.
How did you choose the university where you study physics?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
How did you choose where to study physics, where to start your career, and
where did I choose? I think I made choices, some good choices for some bad reasons. So I really think partly I found physics easy, and compared with the people I was with, it was one of the things I was best at. So I think I did it because I thought I was better at it than other people, not because I most loved it. And actually, I do love it, but I don't think that was a brilliant reason. Although I've heard other people say they chose the subject because they liked the teacher, so it's probably a better reason than that. And as for where, bizarrely, I mean, I always had I was an academic student. I always had my eye on Oxford or Cambridge. I think I chose Cambridge over Oxford because it was a 3-year course and I was in a hurry, and I don't know why I was in such a hurry. Not because it was natural sciences, not pure physics, which would have been a much better reason. So I think I made some quite uneducated choices early on, and I think those have been less important than taking opportunities when they've come. And if I look back at my career, and something I might say is I've had some wonderful support from mentors and great line managers. And they very often, until quite recently, I didn't have a career plan and I didn't look ahead. But I was very brave about taking on new opportunities that made me confront that imposter syndrome and that I wasn't sure I could do when somebody else set me those challenges. And I think that's made more difference than any of the deliberate choices I made, was when somebody said, could you chair our health and safety group? Would you like to be on the council of the Institute of Physics? How would you like to go and run safety in estates? And would you like to go back to a technology you don't know anything about? Would you think about being a Royal Academy of Engineering visiting professor? Would you take on being DSTL's CTO at the same time as running your division? My first instinct is always, oh my goodness, I couldn't, somebody else must be better. And I tend to go away and sleep on it and then come back and go, yes, all right, I'll try and make it work. And I think it's been that willingness to put myself out there and take those opportunities that's made more difference than the things I've actually sort of chosen to go for. Interesting. What's been my favourite project to work on? I think I'm going to name something called Parsifal. And it was not because of the technical content, but because of the ways of working. And it's been a little bit like COVID. So Parsifal was the programme for accelerating defence research in the Afghan war into service as quickly as possible. And the reason, and that was when I was head of the physics department at DSTL. And the reason I loved it was because we had a really quick link from the scientific advisors we had out in Afghanistan telling us what the needs were, through from the scientists saying, what could we do to address this, to defence equipment and supply saying, how would we procure it and build it and get it back out there really quickly. And compared with the typical defence life cycle, which might be 10 years from when you start researching something to when it appears in a fighting environment, we were turning things around in 6 months or a year. And that sort of slaughtering the bureaucracy and seeing the results really quickly was something that I then have tried to take into other programs, and it's something we've really been working on in the Met Office in what we call our research to operations work. So when I sort of reset the Met Office strategy after I joined, I actually changed. So our purpose was, and I'll have to see if I can remember what the old one was, working at the forefront of weather and climate science and technology for protection, prosperity and well-being. I think that's what I inherited. And our new one is helping you make better decisions to stay safe and thrive. And I've really tried to turn it around from we do the science and we see what we can do with it to none of the science we do has any impact until it gets into the hand of somebody who changes what they're going to do as a result. And that doesn't matter whether it's you deciding whether to drive your car or get on a bike today, or whether it's a resilience coordinator wondering whether to close an airport or close a bridge, or whether it's a climate policy maker deciding how high to build a flood barrier and how long it's going to last. That's where the science we do makes a difference. And everything I try to do as a leader is trying to make sure that when we start, we know how we're going to apply that science, and we don't waste time fettling something that isn't usable, and that we focus the research we do on getting it into the hands of people and making a difference to their lives. And I think that experience of doing that in a war situation really helped me. And I'm also hoping that the world having to pull together in the COVID situation and all the different ways we've worked will help us make a better job of how we respond to climate change, where we've been far too slow as a species and really need to raise our game very, very urgently. And I want the Met Office to be absolutely at the heart of that.
So what will be your main advice for an undergraduate? Is it good to be very tough in planning ahead, like trying to find what do you need for a job that you are willing to have, or do you should allow yourself to go with the flow and take the opportunities you find in your way? What is your main advice?
I think more that work hard, get the best degree you can, for sure. Get yourself some experience, so you've got something to show on a CV that shows that at least you can get up every day and go to work and be employable. And best of all, if it can be aligned to what you want to do in future. But actually, if it's serving in a coffee shop, I would rather see that on an undergraduate CV and be able to ask somebody how they dealt with difficult customers and what they did when they had conflicting demands, than have somebody who's done lots and lots of wonderful academic work but never actually been in the world of work. So any job is better than none. And then don't obsess about the perfect job. Get a job and take the opportunities that offer, but undoubtedly large organisations can offer more. And I think we encourage school children to think that they could sort of set their eyes on a job and go after it. Well, actually, the job I'm in now has existed since 1854, but most of the ones I've done in the meantime, they haven't. And many of them, I mean, being head of a cyber division didn't exist when I did my degree. So thinking I want to be head of a cyber division wasn't a thinkable thought. So setting out to do that would have been a nonsense, and the world will go on changing, and science is one of the places it changes first. So you don't know what you're going to be doing in 20 years' time. I thought I didn't want to be a manager, so look how wrong I was.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much, Penny, for all your inspiring talk and for all your advice. And it was wonderful to have you here with us.
It's a great pleasure. I'm going to try to get into the gather space. I've only got a short while before I have to go and meet the WMO Secretary General, but I will go and at least see how it works, because I'm very interested to find out. And thank you for all your kind words on the chat.